kind of the climax of the book and the whole account. Let's start in verse 1, and we'll read down through the rest of the chapter. It's only 10 verses. So the king and Haman came to banquet with Esther the queen. And the king said again unto Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed even to the half of the kingdom. Then Esther the queen answered and said, If I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Then the king Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, Who is he, and where is he, that durst presume in his heart to do so? And Esther said, The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden. And Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet. Pardon me. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman was fallen upon the bed whereon Esther was. Then said the king, Will he force the queen also before me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. And Harbonah, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, Behold also the gallows of 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, standeth in the house of Haman. Then the king said, Hang him thereon. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. Let's pray. Father, this evening as we get to the exciting part here of the book, it's been obvious all along that you have been guiding and directing and working. And sometimes it's hard to see, as it is in our lives, that you are working behind the scenes to accomplish your will and to bring honor and glory to yourself. But it's incredible how you are able to turn these events completely upside down in a manner that seems humanly impossible, but is very much so divinely possible. I thank you for your mercy, love, and grace, and your goodness to us, your blessings to us, your kindness to us. In Jesus' name, amen. The Queen's second banquet is how we start off the chapter here. And it's important to remember that the interlude has ended, because the interlude really gives us, even though it happens in the span between the first and the second banquet, it is what gives us the background information that otherwise we would wonder why things go down the way they do in chapter 7. If you remember, Haman was bragging that life couldn't be any better. He's rich, he's promoted and powerful, he has lots of kids. And he gets this edict signed to wipe out the Jews, and he has the signet ring of the king, showing that he has been given a lot of power. And how can it get any better? But then if you remember, it ended last night sorrowful about one man who wouldn't bow down to him. And when he thought about how great everything else was in his life, it paled in comparison to the fact that that one guy just wouldn't bow down to him. And that's what greed does. There's just never satisfied. J.D. Rockefeller supposedly said, How much money do you need? And he said, just $1 more. I don't know how many millions he made after he said that, but the thought was, got to have just a little bit more. There's always something just a little bit more. It's also important to remember that through this whole thing, God has been working to try and bring Haman to some humility and some understanding of what's going on here. And he shows up early. Actually, when he goes home that last night, he has another party to cheer everybody up, and he builds the gallows for Mordecai that he's going to hang him on the next morning. So he shows up early in court, and he thinks he is being honored with his wildest dreams. Man, I get to be treated like a king for a day. To have him dashed in pieces because he has to do it for his enemy instead. And he goes home and he's all upset, and his wife and his friends give him this chilling prediction. And there are warning signs here that God is working, and if Haman would have listened, maybe there's a far different outcome to this. After all, God sent a prophet to preach to Nineveh, and it sure didn't seem like they were going to repent. And after 3 days of walking up and down through the city and not exactly being an enthusiastic preacher wanting anybody to repent, the whole city repents, and God spared them. You look at something humanly speaking and you think, no, that's impossible. Nothing's impossible with God. While Haman is on one railroad track and he's going full steam ahead thinking that his life is headed in one direction, here's the king, and he doesn't realize it, but he's facing the opposite direction. Because the king has enjoyed a banquet with the queen, and we know that he favors her and he cares about her a great deal. And so he's asked her about her request, and she said, well, come back tomorrow. Let's have another banquet, and then I'll tell you tomorrow. And he can't wait to hear her request. I would imagine it has been on his heart all night long. Might be part of the reason why the sleepless night. But he has a sleepless night, which is never good for making decisions the next day. But he reads about Mordecai uncovering a plot to kill him. And he realizes they haven't honored him, so then he honors him in the morning, and it's been a big morning for him. And now it's time to go to the banquet, and I'm sure he's tired. You don't sleep at night, you're probably not having the greatest of days. And he still doesn't know what the queen wants, and he gets to see the queen again, so he's probably excited about that. But now he has to wait because that Haman ran off to his house, and now he has to send a courier to go get Haman, and there he is waiting for Haman to get back so he can go to the banquet. And all of these little things, when you look at them, sometimes you say, well, it's just circumstantial, or it's just... But all of these things God is using as he puts together a 1,000-piece puzzle. And you put a couple of pieces in and maybe you don't see what it looks like. And you put a couple of more pieces in. But after you have 900 pieces in, it starts, you just see a few holes. But the whole of what God's trying to do here is really starting to come together. So that brings us to the banquet that is introduced here. This is the 7th banquet recorded in the book of Esther. You say, why is that such a big deal? Well, it tells me a couple of things. King liked a good party. Because if the king didn't like a good party, there would be no point in the narrative here of describing that there are 7 banquets. But the banquets obviously are very important to what has been happening since way back in chapter 1. It's almost like instead of giving a lot of time about passing, it's just like from this banquet to this banquet to this banquet. We also know that the king liked to drink from chapter 1, verses 7 through 10, when he was having his party for the folks in Susa after his big, long, month-long ordeal. And he gets a little drunk, and he calls for his wife, and she refuses to show up, and he makes a hasty decision. You don't make a great decision the last time you were drinking and the queen was involved. You'd think maybe you'd be a little careful. And it's important to notice that he's tired because he hasn't slept that night. He's wondering what's going on with the queen's request. He's drinking, and he had to wait for Haman to come back from his house. So we get in here, and he sits down, and it's interesting that, there's no information about anything that happens here. They come to the banquet, verse 2. And the king said unto Esther. It's like She poured the wine. They sat down for their fellowship time together, and he instantly asks her, God has been working on Haman, booking down this track. He's working on the king, booking down this track, and neither of them realize the truth yet about who Esther really is. Neither of them seem to know that the queen is Jewish, and that becomes important here in a couple of verses. The other thing that I see that's really interesting about this, mentioned it last time, the queen specifically asked that Haman would come, so Haman's there. But if Haman's not there, then the king and the queen get alone time. And he has enjoyed her banquet yesterday, and he enjoyed her company yesterday, and he has been thinking about her request, so she has been on his mind since yesterday at the banquet. And maybe he's starting to resent a little bit that his prime minister is here because they could just talk and have conversation like husband and wife and enjoy a completely different dinner if you kicked old Haman out of there. But again, all these little details, I think, start coming together. Look at the queen's request. Notice, she waits for him to ask again. She told him that she would tell him when they got there, but she waits until the king asks. And the way this is laid out gives me the impression that he didn't wait very long. I mean, he sat down, they started to drink wine, and he asked because it's been on his mind. It's one of the reasons I think he was mulling over it all night long. But what I want you to see here in verse 3 and 4, this is a masterfully revealed royal dilemma. I mean, this is genius. She has proper respect and a little buttering up of the ego for the king. Esther the queen answered and said, "If I have found favor in thy sight, if you care about me," basically, "and if it please the king." In other words, this isn't a selfish request. This is your decision alone. You can do it or you can't do it. This is all up to you. Boy, you want to butter up a king. He knows everything's up to him, right? You don't accept the scepter, send out the scepter, and she's dead. You don't have to, he can vooch her out of there like he did Vashti. But the way that she approaches this sets the tone for what she's getting ready to say. Let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. She works on the king's emotions and feelings with the way that she words this. And instantly in his mind, he's probably sitting there and looking at this and thinking, oh, wait a minute. Why would my beloved queen be in danger? Right? Wouldn't you be asking that question? Nobody can come into the queen's part of the palace except the chamberlains. And if you remember from earlier, there are 7 of them. Those guys are responsible for everything and anything that comes in and out of the queen's side of the palace. Any person, any object, anything. Their head's on the line if something inappropriate is found in there. And so they're pretty careful about how they take care of the queen and how they take care of the women in the queen's palace. But what she is doing here is she has said, if I mean anything to you, and I know that this decision is solely up to you, coming from a place of vulnerability and humility, let my life be given me, which insinuates that she needs it back, right? Insinuates that there's already been something done that has affected her, and he's probably sitting here going, hold on a minute, now how in the world he's probably getting ready to holler for a chamberlain and ask what's going on, the way that she has worded this. She doesn't challenge him. Well, king, let me tell you something. Now, there is a man in your kingdom that's trying to kill us. That would be questioning his authority and his judgment. Instead, she puts it out there kind of emotionally tugging at his heartstrings. Something has been done to me and I'm in danger, and now really this is solely up to you. If you care about me, this is solely up to you to do something about it. The word petition is a loan, a favor, ask of authority. Now, it's a common word in the Hebrew. When I looked this thing up, a lot of times people were asking a petition of the Lord, like Samuel's mom. This is the child that I petitioned God for. And that, I would really, really like to have this, but I have no right to ask type of a thing. Very common word. But then the second phrase, and my people at my request, that word request is kind of an unusual word because it's only used in the Old Testament one other place than in Esther, and that's actually in the book of Ezra when he is getting ready to travel back to build the temple. And he says, I have made a request of these different things that we are going to need to build the temple. And so what's interesting about this Hebrew word is I couldn't find a use for it anywhere in the Old Testament except for in the Babylonian and Persian Empire when they were addressing the king. I don't know if there's anything to it or not. But what she's doing now is she's making this scope bigger. It's big enough that somebody is attacking the queen, ought to be in the king's eyes. But now she says, and my people. My people are in the same dilemma. There's already an action that has taken place that affects them in the same way. I would think that this was very perplexing to the king. He probably thought that she was Persian. After all, those Jewish folks have been in captivity now for generation after generation after generation. And then you have a whole group of people in your kingdom that are in trouble. And if you're the king, you're probably sitting there going, now hold on a minute. It's one thing to say that my queen is vulnerable. It's a whole nother thing to say that I don't even have control of my whole kingdom because there's a whole nationality of people that are in trouble scattered throughout my kingdom. I mean, his mind has to be racing because he's probably thinking, who's in control here? It doesn't seem like I am. And what she is going to say to them here, especially in verse 4, do not give me up to the malice of the man that seeks to kill me and my people. That is the point that she is driving home. You have the power to stop me from being vulnerable before this guy. But if verse 3 was masterful, in verse 4 it gets better because she gives the reason for the request. For we are sold. It doesn't say we will be. She speaks of it always as a past action. This is something that has already happened. I and my people are sold. And the word would move him because the word means you are treating them like merchandise. Now think about this. You have the king sitting in the palace at a special banquet with the queen. You don't get any more authority. You don't get any more important. You don't get any more dignified than what's going on at a banquet of wine in that palace. And yet she just said, I have been merchandised. In other words, somebody has cheapened your wife. He is probably getting more angry and more angry and more angry. But if you sell somebody, that means somebody gained from it. And that's kind of the salt in the wound that's going on here in this verse, because he's beginning to realize, wait a second, I am the one that's profiting from this. I and my people. Now, she uses three terms here. To be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. To be destroyed means to be desolate, to utterly perish. That's the intent. Slain means to kill. In other words, with deadly intent, that is the motive. I want to kill you. And then perish means to be void of, to not have an escape. That's the result. In other words, the intent is, I want to absolutely desolate every Jewish person. I want to kill them, make no mistake about it, until there is no one that has made an escape. That's the result. Well, if nobody makes an escape, that includes Esther. But she's not done yet. If we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I had held my tongue. If it had just been slavery, I wouldn't have said anything. Buying slaves would have been, different. It would have been a difficult thing for the slaves, but you could look at it and say, well, it's just because you buy and you sell slaves all the time, right? And if they are slaves, then you have this whole group of people that are still contributing to the kingdom. And so she says, if they were contributing to your kingdom, king, I would have kept my peace. Now think about what she said here. I would have had to lay aside my royal robes and where I live, and I would no longer be considered your wife because I would be a slave. But at least I could still be contributing to the kingdom in some way, and so I would have kept my mouth shut because that's okay with me. And now how do you think the king would feel about that? I mean, you can't sit here and second guess the motives of someone who says, I'd have been willing to do this on your behalf. But the way she ties the bow at the end, she says, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. In other words, she says, you're buying a slaughter. The implication there is, how much is it worth to slaughter a whole people group? And whatever he was willing to pay you doesn't replace what the Jews would have contributed to your kingdom, not only now, but for years and years and years to come. You see what she's done? She's not only painting herself in a great picture, but she's also painting, I don't know what he paid you, but you might want to sit down and think about that sum, because whatever it is he said he was going to pay you, you have lost the value of all of the work, all of the talents, all of the abilities of those folks forever. I mean, if they are absolutely gone, anything that you would have benefited from any Jew anywhere in your kingdom is gone. Are you trying to tell me that the enemy availed you the amount of money that would replace all of that loss? Wow. But what's really masterful is, you'll notice that she has not named names. She identifies with her people not by name, but by fate. She doesn't say, I am a Jew. She says, I and my people have been delivered up to be slaughtered, and she uses the exact same wording. That's why those three words are important. To be destroyed, to be slain, to perish. That's the exact wording that Haman put in the edict that he sealed with the king's seal and he sent out. So now all of a sudden it becomes very important, because in chapter 3 and verse 13, those are the words that Haman used. And in chapter 4, verse 8, she had a copy because Mordecai gave it to her. And the wise woman that she is using that information to full advantage right here. Now look at the king's response here in verses 5 through 8. Then King Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen. What's interesting in the Hebrew, there are more words to describe the first half of that verse than there are the second half of that verse. Who is he and where is he that durst presume is one Hebrew word. And it's almost like he's stuttering. Who, what, where? The emotion comes out in the way that he phrases this. He is starting to realize that he has been played as a fool. He wasn't paying attention. He didn't ask questions. He didn't think about the value of the Jewish people, and he obviously didn't know that it affected his queen. The word that he uses here, presume, means to fill his heart to do so. In other words, he says, what kind of a person would fill their heart to do something like this? Masterful, because Esther has presented it as if it is a conspiracy. Someone came to you and conspired to hurt your kingdom, and they figured out treacherously how to do it. The king's response lets us know who tried to subtly circumnavigate me to get an irrevocable decree that a whole group of people should be destroyed involving my beloved queen. And he's probably putting it together now and saying, and someone I read about last night who saved my life. Because if the only two people that he knows that are Jews are the Queen Esther and Mordecai, both of them are close to him and very valuable to him. And now he's probably thinking, hold on just a minute. I mean, how many others out there are as valuable as Esther and Mordecai? So Esther is going to identify him. And again, she is an intelligent lady. Esther said the adversary and enemy to the king. She doesn't say my adversary and enemy. What does she say? He is an adversary and enemy of the king. He is an adversary and enemy of the queen. And he is an adversary and enemy of this whole group of people. And then she goes on and says, he's right there. Doesn't say Prime Minister Haman. Says what? Wicked. What a term. Evil, adversity, affliction, exceedingly grievous. In other words, what she's saying is everything that comes out of this man is evil, it's adverse, it's grievous. Not painting him in a good light, and she names him by name. Now, as powerful as Haman is, and he's wearing the king's signet ring, right? Humanly speaking, you're sitting here going, well, who wins the power struggle? Does the queen or does Haman? Verse 7 tells you all you need to know. Well, 6 tells you all you need to know. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. Verse 7, king storms out. The king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden. I imagine he goes into the garden and he's trying to think and he's trying to get control of himself because he is hot. That's what the word means. He is hot, full of fury. We know from history he's a hothead anyway. They haven't just pushed one button. It's like jumping up and down on the keyboard, right? I mean, it's button after button after button. There's been treachery going on. Somebody's been deceiving you. Somebody's been working you. And they're striking back at me. And I imagine there are a whole bunch of thoughts and emotions that are working through him. And so he is going to go out. And he's got a lot to think about. His favorite officer is becoming an object of his wrath. He plotted against his queen. And at this point, he hasn't asked Haman anything, so he doesn't know if Haman knows she's a Jew or not. But think about it. The only other Jew that he has been mad at has been Mordecai. And Mordecai is the one who spilled the beans on Timnath, and can't remember the other dude's name, who wanted to kill him. And they were doorkeepers, not gatekeepers. So they were closer to the king than Mordecai was, had access to him, probably could have found an opportune time and made it happen, right? Mordecai is the one, so maybe he's starting to say, no, wait a second. If those guys were trying to kill me, and Mordecai stopped them, and Haman hates Jews, and he wanted to be treated like a king for a day, Maybe he's even putting together, was Haman in with these guys that tried to kill me? I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff for this poor guy to process as he is pacing back and forth in the garden. He is absolutely furious, and Haman is fearful. Haman sensed that he is the object of awful consequences, and so the only thing left for him is to beg the queen, because she's the only one that can persuade the king to keep him alive. Notice, he has no other thought in his head. He doesn't think that he's going to stay the prime minister. He doesn't think that he is going to blossom somewhere. All he thinks is, well, I can beg Esther for my life. And so that's exactly what he does. Haman stood up to make request for his life. Only thing on his mind, to the only person that he thinks can change anything, and that's Esther the queen. For he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Now here comes the king. He walks back in. The king returned out of the palace garden. He has walked it out and talked it out, and he has made a decision on what he intends to do. And so he walks back in, and we'll never know if he intended to ask questions, if he was going to do something. He probably has calmed down a little bit, but he probably can't wait to get a hold of somebody and make somebody pay. And he walks back in, and maybe he has worked off some of his anger, and the very first thing he sees is Haman down on his knees before the queen, begging for his life, and he thinks, oh my word, has he no respect at all for anything? Is he going to sit there and force himself on the queen right here in my palace and in my presence like he's the king himself? This guy has done a huge 180 on Haman. But I want you to think about this. Talk about God switching things up. Haman was so angry that a Jewish man would not bow to him one day ago. And what's he doing right now? On his knees, begging a Jewish woman. You talk about role reversal. He went from, there's only one person in this kingdom that I know of that won't worship me and bow to me like they ought to, and I can't stand that guy, I'm going to have to kill him. To, I will get on my face and beg for my life before a Jewish woman. His angry outcry here sparks action. They means the chamberlains, because those are the only ones that are in there. So when the king hollers, it is the chamberlains that cover Haman's face. Now remember, no detail is insignificant. Esther is brought into the palace. She goes through her year of purification, and the folks on this side of the whole situation love her. And they give her everything she needs, and when she's getting ready to go to the king, do you want anything else? Do you need any? They're poofing her up and giving, making sure the hair is perfect. And then when she goes to the other side of the house, guess what? The chamberlains over there love her too. And they're taking care of her. And it's interesting to me that she has built such a relationship with these guys that Awana is the one who offers a solution. They run up and throw something over top of Haman's face. It's a sign that he is condemned, but they also didn't want the king to have to look at him. And there's no way you're going to talk when somebody throws something over your face. You know what's coming. Haman says, or Harbonah says, King, by the way, there's a gallows 50 cubits high which Haman had made for Mordecai, and it's down there at his house. He can't even hardly get done saying it. And the king said, take him down there and hang him on it. And I'm just going to guess it didn't take folks very long to get Haman down there and hang him on it, because they love Esther, they respect Mordecai, but Haman's been kind of a jerk. The king commands it, and it's done quickly. Then was the king's wrath pacified. And you think, whew, a break finally in the action. But The king's anger is pacified, but the king still has a really big problem. He has the same problem with Daniel and the lion's den. The law has been sealed and sent, and you cannot take it back. So when we push on into the next chapter, how are we going to solve this problem? Because the queen, whom he loves, is still in danger. And he's been a jerk. He could have stopped it. He could have prevented it. And he didn't.